Good morning for those who are just joining us. We're going to give it just another minute here to allow everybody to sign on. So we'll get started shortly. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our May Emerging Conversations webinar on what happened in the 2022 legislative session. There is certainly a lot to unpack in this past session, especially from these last few weeks. And we're really excited about our keynote and our panel that we have with you today to be able to recognize all of that hard work and legislative change that occurred. We recognize that many of us are a little tired of Zoom at this point, but we do appreciate this platform because it does allow us to record these conversations and make sure we can share them widely after. We also love this because it's interactive. And so if you have positive comments, questions, things that we can help support answers to, please feel free to put those in the chat. If we don't get to those today, we're happy to circulate the answers after today's event. We'd also encourage you after the conversation to join us on Mighty Network. If you haven't checked that out, that's our new online community where we're really working to come together when we can't be together in person. And so we'd encourage you to join us there for a follow-up conversation. We'll drop the link in the chat for you. We'd also like to take a moment to thank our elected officials and dignitaries who have joined us today. And as it goes in Zoom, I'm trying to look at the room of who's here, but if I missed you, please drop your name in the chat so that we know that you're here today. I see Jefferson County Commissioners Leslie Dahlkemper and Tracy Kraft Tharp. Welcome. Of course, we have our esteemed panel with us today, State Senator Rachel Zinzinger, State Representatives Brianna Titone and Lindsay Doherty. Our Fire Chief Mike Piper is with us today. And I believe we have the school board member Danielle Varda as well. So we're glad to welcome all of you. And again, if I missed you, please drop your name in the chat. It was not on purpose, and we'd love to recognize you. We'd also like to take a moment to thank our annual sponsors who make these events possible. So on the screen, you can see all of those incredible partners to the Arvada Chamber. We continue to be grateful for their support. We'd also like to give a big special thank you to Community First Foundation, who is our presenting sponsor for these forums for 2022. Again, we'll drop that link in the chat for you so that you can learn a little bit more about Community First Foundation. We also want to make sure that you know what's coming up. We have a number of these events in the near future, and so we hope that you can continue to join us. We are in person once a quarter, so our next in-person event will be the State of Mental Health, which all of you in our business community continue to tell us that that is a big challenge that you're facing for you and your team, and so we want to continue to lift that up and learn together how we can navigate that. We do have a number of opportunities coming up through the chamber. I'll start with Centered, which actually ties to the mental health update I just gave. Centered is a program that we're proud to partner with the Arvada Resiliency Task Force and Jefferson Center for Mental Health to launch Centered. Centered is a program for employers at no cost. You're able to access 5 coaching sessions, supervisor consultations, classes and learning, and much more. So we really hope that this is a tool that our business community will take advantage of, because we know that the past few years have been difficult and we're all still working through how to navigate that, and we're proud to offer a resource to support it. We also are excited that Taste of Arvada is back in a big way. So July 21st, we hope you can join us at Apex. We love our partnership with Apex, and we're expecting a really exciting event this year with over 50 food and beverage taste that you can enjoy. So that's it for updates. We're so glad to have you with us. As always, your arvatachamber.org has a wealth of information of upcoming events and opportunities. So feel free to jump on there if you have questions about anything we're doing, or reach out to a member of our team. It's now my pleasure to introduce and welcome our event MC for today, Emcee School. Emcee is the proud owner of Emcee School Farmers Insurance Agency and a longtime champion for supporting the success of our business community through effective business policy. She currently serves as the chair of our Government Affairs Advocacy CAPS Council, where she has helped our team of nearly 25 business leaders understand the impacts of policy changes. And we noted that she's actually been doing that since 2008 today, which is incredible. So thank you, Emcee, for your long service to the advocacy CAPS and to the chamber. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Cammie, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today and in the future, as this event will be recorded and shared widely to follow. I can affirm that this legislative session was packed with a lot, and much of it had a direct impact on our business community. So we're going to kick off today with a keynote address from the Arvada Chamber and JCBL lobbyist Jeff Wiest, who will provide an overview of what happened at the Capitol. We will then move into a facilitated question and answer with 3 of our state legislators, who I have to assume are still recovering from the end of the session. So thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Wiest. Jeff crafts a sound public policy on behalf of corporate, government, and nonprofit and trade association clients, and works closely with legislators and regulators to advance balanced legislative solutions. For nearly 20 years, clients have consulted with Jeff for all aspects of government relations, including strategic planning, lobbying, political fundraising, coalition building, grassroots campaigns, and communications. We're going to drop a link off in Jeff's bio into the chat so you can review his extensive experience. And with that, we'll leave it to you, Jeff.
All right, thank you, Amy, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'll try to do a quick recap of what happened in the legislative session, as Amy said, as we're recovering from our PTSD, and then turn it over to our legislator for a great conversation. For those of you who don't know, the Jefferson County Business Lobby is the united voice of the Jeffco business community at the state capitol. Our members are the Chambers of Commerce in Jefferson County, as well as the Jeffco EDC, and Arvada is one of the leading members of the JCBL. We very much appreciate your support. The legislative session adjourned close to midnight last Wednesday night, as the Constitution requires it to do so. In terms of the number of bills that we had to deal with this year, that the legislators had to deal with this year, it was relatively average, not quite 700 in number. The vast majority of those bills do ultimately pass. A little higher percentage this year than normal, about 3/4 of those bills actually ended up heading to the governor's desk. And while it might not seem like it from reading the media or even listening to Arvada Legislative Committee meetings, sometimes a huge percentage of those bills are bipartisan. It was a busy year, as Amy said, for the business community in general and JCBL in particular, but then it always is. I think our JCBL tracker has over 100 bills on it that have some impact on the general business community or important sectors to the county's economy. So obviously, I'm not going to talk about all 107 of those. So I'll kind of try to tackle this thematically at a high level. Some of the major themes for the general business community in the 2022 legislative session started off with a large package of bills that the legislature considered divvying up nearly $2 billion in federal funding from the American Recovery Act. That was legislation passed last year that flows to the states to help state, local, and city governments deal with the impact of the coronavirus. The portions of that package that were really important to the business community included over $250 million for affordable housing, over $100 million investment in workforce training, In addition to that, there were a number of other separate bills dealing with structural changes to how the state does career tech ed and other workforce training that we really made some significant progress on this year on an issue very important to all of us. And that also includes $600 million to backfill the unemployment insurance trust fund, something that all businesses pay into, and that was severely impacted by the lockdowns and the coronavirus. This all, plus several other really important buckets of money that I didn't even mention, like mental health and others, all really represent a major investment in the state's economy. That's not all in terms of federal money coming to the state. There are literally billions more coming from the recently enacted Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act that will mean at least as much for Colorado as the ARPA did, maybe as much as $4 to $6 billion in more investment in the state. This is kind of once in a generation kind of money, and the business community is watching this closely because we want to make sure it's spent wisely and that we get a good return on that investment. It is interesting to note that a lot of the federal money that is coming to state governments, not just Colorado, has yet to even really be spent yet. So how that interplays with the overall inflationary picture is interesting, but I'll leave that to the economists to discuss. Another major area of legislation that we always pay attention to, of course, as a business community, is just general business liability and regulation. A few of the bills that passed in this area included some more potential for lawsuits against businesses with class actions and workplace safety whistleblower lawsuits. Probably not a huge deal, but ones that we weren't really able to make very amendments to. But there were a number of major bills that did pass that we were able to negotiate and heavily stakeholder. That includes the creation of a new whistleblower regime for state contracting fraud. That was a bill that was very well stakeholdered by the Attorney General, by A.G. Weiser, and the business community was very comfortable with that final bill. Anybody who does federal contracting is already aware of the federal version of the False Claims Act, it's called, and we created a state version of that. There's new law regarding wage claims and wage disputes between employers and employees. This was another bill that was very aggressive and overbroad when first introduced, but we were able to negotiate a huge number of amendments to the bill to address a very real problem, which is a few bad actors not paying their employees properly or at all in some cases. And so if you are one of those bad actors, which I know nobody here is, there are some new laws coming down the pike. But if you are a business who tries to pay your employees on time and does a good job of it, there's not much to worry about. And that bill, as passed in the business community, is neutral there. And just to give one more example of bills that started off problematic for the business community, but through great stakeholder engagement and negotiations, we were able to get comfortable with, was a bill imposing new restrictions on non-compete clauses, non-solicitation clauses, and other kinds of post-employment restrictions that many businesses use. Our own Jefferson County Representative Tipper was the sponsor of that bill, and she was fantastic to work with. There were a number of very problematic bills for the business community that we were able to actually kill in committee or at some point in the process. Legalized marijuana use in the workplace, on the job, was one of those bills that did not make it through the process. Likewise, there were two separate attempts to impose new restrictions on the metropolitan districts and other special districts that are necessary for development in Jefferson County and around the state that are needed to address our housing availability crisis. And another one that the business community watched very closely was a bill that was never introduced dealing with workplace harassment, which is an area which I think everybody agrees more improvements can always be made. The proponents of the bill, their version of the bill, the employment community thought was pretty overreaching, however, and we were never able to find common ground on that through the legislative session. So that bill was never introduced, although a smaller bill making a few tweaks here and there was introduced and did pass without any opposition from the business community. I want to note that there were a number of positive tax credits and other cost savings for businesses that was passed by the legislature. A couple of examples of that is the state and local taxation changes. This is a bill that retroactively allows pass-through entities, so S Corps, C Corps, other small businesses, not C Corps, excuse me, LLCs, pass-through entities, which a lot of small businesses are, to pay their personal state income tax liability at the entity level rather than the personal level in order to avoid the cap on that deduction that was imposed by Congress a number of years ago. This bill that passed this year allows businesses to, or those business owners to do so retroactively back to 2018, which is a very positive thing. The legislature at the last minute came up with a compromise deal to save both homeowners and business owners some money on property taxes, which, as we all know, are going up for various reasons. This probably will not, it depends on your situation, obviously, but in all likelihood, it'll slow the rate of the increase in property taxes, but is meaningful relief that the legislature was able to arrive out in the 11th hour. There were a number of other tax credit and cost saving measures, fee relief measures that the legislature passed. Many of them were relatively small and aimed at really truly the smallest businesses, but maybe appropriately so. There are still a lot of other bills to discuss, and I know I left out a number of important ones, but I kind of wanted to try to hit the highlights. But I think the bottom line is that, with a few exceptions in a few specific industries, the bills that were the most problematic for the general business community were successfully amended to the point where the worst impacts were mitigated, and to the point where we were even able to support some of them. And of course, again, want to note that there were a number of positive bipartisan bills that were accomplished. Being able to pre-negotiate out that huge package of ARPA bills, nearly $2 billion in spending before they were introduced, and they were introduced almost entirely on a bipartisan basis, was an incredible feat. And it's almost unprecedented, I would say, in lots of ways. So with that, before I turn it over to the legislator panel, I do want to take a quick moment, though, to note that all three of our guest legislators carried a number of bills that were important to the business community, including Senator Zenzinger, who carried some of the affordable housing, workforce, and infrastructure bills that I referenced above. Representative Doherty carried a bill to provide tabor refunds to individuals and business owners this year, as the Constitution requires, but to do so in a creative way. And she was incredibly helpful in helping the JCBL address a problem in the original bill that would have made it harder for small businesses to get that tabor refund. And so we appreciate that very much. Representative Tatone carried a small business recovery loan program bill that I think a lot of small businesses will be able to take advantage of as they're recovering from the coronavirus. And of course, I had the pleasure of working with her extensively on a number of rural broadband issues that have for a long time. So thank you from the Jefferson County Business Lobby and me for working with us all year. So Amy, with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Your voice and perspective on behalf of the Arvada Chamber has been an incredible asset for our business community. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Okay, we will now move into our panel discussion. We have three esteemed legislators with us today. And as we get started, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize that each of these legislators have been outstanding allies to the Arvada Chamber and to the businesses as we've all navigated complicated bills in 2022. It is my pleasure to welcome our panel. As you can imagine, they all have robust backgrounds, and we would encourage you to visit their websites to learn more about their platforms and their backgrounds. We're going to go ahead and drop the links into the chat so you can do that. But we have here with us today Senator Rachel Zenzinger, Representative Brianna Titone, and Representative Lindsay Doherty. All right, let's jump into the panel discussion. We'll ask that you each try to limit your answers to no more than 2 minutes. We realize how challenging that will be, as you each have incredible passion. All right. What was the most important bill you worked on this year, whether or not it was your own?
Should we start with Senator Zenzinger?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. I'm happy to go first. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate all of you being here this morning and for having me join you. This is one of my favorite legislative recap events. I had a number of bills. I prime sponsored 60 pieces of legislation. I do include the budget as part of that, even though my name was not listed first on the budget. And that included 23 Senate bills and 32 House bills and 4 resolutions. I think one bill that really stands out for me, it personally was my favorite bill, was Senate Bill 8, which excuse me, I'm actually getting choked up about it when I talk about it. It's providing higher education supports for foster youth. So in Colorado today, only 30% of our foster youth are actually graduating from high school. And among that 30% that are graduating from high school, only 15% are attempting to go into some sort of post-secondary education. That would include trade schools or college. And among that group, only 5% are actually graduating with a certificate of some sort, and only 3% are moving on to actually receiving a bachelor's or associate's degree. So when you think about 4,500 foster youth in our state that are of that high school graduating segment, to only have 3% move on into post-secondary education is highly problematic. And in fact, what the statistics show is if they do not move into some sort of post-secondary training or education, they tend to end up in our incarcerated, or they tend to end up homeless, or they tend to end up living in poverty for the rest of their lives. So for me, providing a total cost of attendance support for our foster youth was not only important for their lives in order to achieve a good living, but also important for the business community and for our society at large. If you think about it, it's really important that we have our foster youth, through no fault of their own, who ended up in the system, have the skills and what they need in order to be successful in life. And I think that that for me was probably the bill that I cared about the most. Although I think also passing the state budget and the School Finance Act was up there too. So.
Sounds great. Thank you, Senator Zenzinger. How about Representative Titone?
Well, thanks very much for having me here. It's hard to really pick a favorite bill, but I think that one of the ones that was probably most impactful was House Bill 1409, and that's the Community Revitalization Grant Program. So last year I ran Senate Bill 252, which allocated $65 million for revitalization of shovel-ready projects around Colorado. And that bill was super successful. We got all that money out the door. We got it to a whole bunch of different projects that were ready to go. It created housing. It created bringing back some of these buildings and facilities that are going to bring more tourism and economic development to a whole bunch of different cities all across Colorado. And that program had so much demand that there was almost $100 million worth of projects that didn't get funded. So I ran a budget amendment to bring that back. It was a bipartisan budget amendment for $50 million, and the $50 million didn't get funded. We were trying to spread that money out over several different requests that people had and prioritize, but we ended up with $20 million. We did a bill on that to make sure that we were getting some more of those projects funded. And these projects are, like I said, are going to bring housing. They're often in communities that are diverse. Some of them are rural communities. More than 50% are in rural communities. And it really supports the arts, and the arts are really important to Colorado, and it's a blossoming and valuable source of employment, and for entertainment and for business. So I was really happy to be able to get some money to that program again, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more money for those programs for the future, because we'll still have about $80 million left of projects that won't get funded, and those are going to be valuable to the economic development of Colorado. And I just want to do a quick shout out to my bill last year that should be finished, which was House Bill 1230 from 2021, which was the portal for the rules for small businesses to know how the rules are changing. And there were a lot of people that talked to me about that bill, and even after I passed the bill, people didn't know about it. So I just wanted to remind everybody that will be coming available pretty soon, so you'll be able to check out what's going on with the rules that pertain to your business.
Great, thank you so much, Representative Titone. And next we'll move on to Representative Doherty.
Great, thanks so much. And it's wonderful to be here and see you all this morning. I wanted to, similar to Senator Zenzinger, my favorite bill has to do with our youth. As a background, I do guardian ad litem work since I graduated law school at DU, where I represent abused and neglected children who are taken out of their homes. And so I have seen, firsthand the services and everything that these youth need to be successful in the future. And so I brought a bill this year. It was House Bill 1038. And what it did is it changes the legal standard in court for how a guardian ad litem represents their juvenile client. So before 1038, the current standard was best interest of the child. So regardless of whatever the youth thought in court, I would advocate for their best interest. And I would take into light my past experiences and that sort of thing as I'm advocating for them in court. What 1038 did was change the standard to purely client directed, which I think is so important, because what it does is it gives our youth even more of a voice and a way to be successful and advocate for themselves in their future. And that standard only pertains to children above the age of 12. But I think, again, it's a huge shift. It's a shift that a lot of states are making, more and more states are making. And I was just so proud to be able to do that for the state of Colorado, because I have seen how much these kids need to advocate for themselves and need to start doing that at a young age so they can continue to do that, because they really don't have a lot of supports that they can rely on. So that was my favorite bill. We had fantastic testimony that passed through with all Republican and Democratic support in House Judiciary, and I had bipartisan support in the House and Senate for that as well. So just very excited to bring that one. I think it's a really good shift for our youth in Colorado. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Representative Doherty. All right, we'll move on to the next topic. How do you see the current balance of power between the executive and legislative branches? Some in the business community are concerned that the legislature defers too much to the governor on spending priorities like federal pandemic aid and infrastructure funding. and broad rulemaking authority without many sideboards. Is that balance out of whack or just about right in your view? We'll go ahead and start with Senator Rachel Zinzinger.
Well, thank you so much for the question. I would say, our governor is definitely much more of a hands-on governor than Governor Hickenlooper was. So I've served under both governors, and I will tell you that Governor Polis has a very much more hands-on, almost interfering type of style when it comes to legislation. In fact, I think the Denver Post called him the legislator in chief. However, when it comes to spending authority, I think that it's really important for everybody to know that much of those ARPA funds, I would say overwhelmingly, the majority of those ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that came to Colorado, were actually custodial funds. So they weren't directed to the legislature. They were directly allocated to communities themselves and or to the governor to spend. So if they are custodial funds, we are not allowed to direct those funds. The governor actually is. But there were approximately $1.8 billion this year that were directed to the legislature, and we absolutely directed where those monies went. So you heard from Jeff earlier that that money was kind of carved up into mostly big priorities where we wanted to make some transformational change, and that included economic recovery, housing, and mental and behavioral health. So overwhelmingly, the majority of those dollars were spent in a bipartisan way and were directed specifically by the legislature. I will also point out, as a member of the Joint Budget Committee, that our $34 billion budget, that among that budget, we only actually have control over approximately 1/3 of it, which is known as the general fund. And I do know that the governor wishes that he could direct that general fund, but it actually is the Joint Budget Committee that does. Although the starting point for the Joint Budget Committee's decisions is the governor's budget, which is constitutionally mandated to be presented to the legislature on November 1st. So we take that November 1st governor's budget as a suggestion to the state legislature as our starting point for when we begin our budget negotiations and our budget process.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Senator Zinzinger. We'll move on to Representative Tatum.
Well, there's not too much extra to add there. One of the things that we have is a 120-day session. So, a lot of our financial decisions are made during that session. And if we were a full-time legislature, we would have a lot more freedom to be able to spend money throughout the year as we needed to and adjust our budget. But, the way we're set up, we have a budget, we have it due in April, we have to vote on that long bill and put all those priorities in. So, when it comes to emergency spending, especially a pandemic or some kind of emergency like that happens, the governor has some authority to be able to do that during those special circumstances. So, that's something that we have to have because of the system that we have. We do supplemental spending as well during the rest of the session, which is governed by some of our year-long committees. But for the most part, we have to have the governor to be able to have access to some spending authority during emergency situations, which is the way our system is set up. We would like to have more time to be able to spend that money, but because of the way we have it, we allocate the money for the whole entire year. We do our best to anticipate what's coming down the line, but when it comes to unexpected things, the governor does have some spending authority. But a lot of the money that did come from the federal government, as Senator Zinzinger said, we did put those into funds and we did allocate those through a very transparent and thoughtful process through those interim committees, and had all the hearings to make sure we were spending that money properly. So It's not a perfect system, but I think the way that it is set up, it does work. And I think that there is a balance of power in the spending authority as we have it.
Great, thank you for that, Representative Tatone. And we will move on to Representative Doherty.
Thank you so much. And so, I'll just add, this was my first term as a legislator, and, I didn't see any poor use of power or anything so far in my short 2 years. Most of the bills I ran don't have fiscal notes. They were policy changes. But as far as the governor's authority and, his spending and emergency authority, I thought there was a lot of focus on small businesses and how we get small businesses through the pandemic. And I know that was reiterated through the governor's office and through the legislature. And so I thought we did a lot for the business community. And so I was happy with how everything shook out. My opinion might change the longer I am doing this job, but so far I think that there are checks and balances for a reason, and I think those are appropriate. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we'll move on to the next topic. We all know the cost of living in our beautiful state is becoming unaffordable for many, especially in housing. The governor and the leadership have made this a priority and touted many bills to save taxpayers and businesses money this election year, as well as significant investments in affordable house programs. But we have also seen many bills that have an even greater and opposite impact on increasing housing costs too. Many of those did not pass, fortunately. How can the business community best convey to the legislature that the public policies have a role to play in the state's affordable housing crisis, and that new mandates and restrictions on development exacerbate the problem? And we will start with Representative Tatone this time.
Right. The affordable housing is it's a complicated thing. I mean, recently, we saw a lot of the increase in the cost of housing due to supply chain issues, and that's outside of a lot of our control. We have seen a lot more development, especially in Arvada, of larger homes, which when you build larger homes that cost more money, that also exacerbates the average home price. But when it comes to what the business community can do to tell us about what's important, those are conversations that need to be had. We don't live in an ivory tower. We work in the state legislature, but we're people who live in the community, and we rely on forums like these to have those conversations about, what the observations are. The Chamber of Commerce is a great place to be that voice of the folks who are experiencing what's happening in all the areas that touch our districts. We rely on you and your members to be able to communicate those things to us so we can develop policies that best reflect what needs to be done. So I would encourage a lot of the members who are on here or maybe listening later on to reach out to us and to have those conversations and set up meetings so we can understand what's happening best. Are your employees struggling to find places to live in the district? How can we incorporate that with the city council? Because the city council also has a big part in how our housing is constructed and how that's built. So it's not just a legislative issue that we need to really tackle, but it's a multi-layer thing that comes from the people on the ground who are experiencing these issues, to the organizations, the city council, and the legislature. And together with that information in hand, we can develop the best policies that are going to work. So I would encourage everyone, we'll make sure we put our contact information in the chat later on, so that way you can have access to contact us and set up a meeting and let us know what you're experiencing, what your employees are experiencing. so we can better address those things.
Great, thank you, Representative Tatone, and we will move on to Representative Doherty.
Thank you. So I grew up here and I remember when houses were affordable, it wasn't that long ago, it was when I was in law school, I think, the housing, we didn't have the insane amount of housing prices that we have. I remember when you could drive up to the mountains on a Friday and come back on a Sunday and not sit in 8 hours of traffic. So I certainly remember, you know, when the cost of living was less, when there was less people here, less traffic, that sort of thing. And I think, as Representative Tatone said, the housing is not, there's not one solution to housing. And there's not one solution to, you know, help with inflation, the cost of living, the rising cost of living and that sort of thing. But what we can do is all work together to find those solutions. And by working together, that means engaging the experts in the respective fields. I can't possibly, going through this job, I can't possibly know everything. I am not an expert in everything. And I rely so much on the people that are to do this job. It's pretty overwhelming, the amount of bills that we get, as you heard in the earlier presentation, and the fact that we have to vote on so many different areas. I really, really rely on my community members and you all. And so when I get phone calls, when I get emails, I really pay attention to those. And I think that's how we make the best policy, is engaging everyone, especially the people who are working in those areas. And that's what I always try to do and what I will continue to do to help the community combat these problems.
Great, thank you, Representative Doherty. And we will move on to Senator Zenzinger.
Well, I think my colleagues spoke very well to the notion of how important it is that we listen to the people that are affected by the legislation. I will say that I very much appreciate Jeff and his team down at the Capitol, because they're usually really good about connecting me with people in the community that have concerns over legislation. And I would just say, if I could throw out a little flag of caution, making laws is like making sausage. And so the way that a bill is introduced almost never is the way that the bill is going to end up. And so listening to Jeff and his team, and listening to constituents and people that are affected by the legislation really helps us work on amendments to be able to craft and change the legislation so that it gets to a good place. And you heard Jeff talk a little bit about this, about how in the beginning, there were a couple of bills that when they were first introduced were really not good for the business community, and in particular for our housing. And so what I did in particular is I take a special interest in those bills, seeing if I can work with the sponsors and work with opposition to come up with amendments that will move that legislation into a better place. So instead of liverwurst, we end up with a really good chorizo, and it just has a little bit more flavor to it. But it takes a community that is very communicative to me and to your lobby team in order to know when there are issues with that piece of legislation. And then also just to understand that unless it has my name on it, I didn't introduce it. And so my ability to impact it is somewhat limited, right? I have to be able to work with 99 other legislators down at the Capitol in order to massage and amend certain bills. So I do want to give a shout out to those folks that weighed in on 2 bills in particular that had to do with housing. Actually 3. So the first one was, and it was mentioned by Jeff, was the Metro District bill. I heavily opposed that bill, and I was really thankful that the bill met its demise in the Senate. The problem with that bill is that there was a pathway to amend it to get it to a good place, but the sponsors were just unwilling to go there. And I think if the sponsors are unwilling to go there, then I think that the legislation just needs to go away. But several other bills that I think where the community weighed in and we were able to get it to a good place that impacted housing, was the building codes bill. So I just want to give a shout out to the city council, and the city council reached out to me and said, you know, this bill is going to be really bad for Arvada in the way that it is. And so a lot of good work was done on that bill in the House. And so I want to thank my House colleagues for working to amend that bill. And then when it came over to the Senate, we amended it even further to get it to a good place. And then lastly, I want to say, rely on your other representatives down at the Capitol besides your lobby team that also have your interests in mind, such as the Colorado Municipal League. They are also a really good partner for me down at the Capitol, kind of helping to show how certain bills are going to impact our community very specifically in Arvada with regard to municipal operations and housing in particular.
Great, thank you for that. That was a great analogy, Senator Zenzinger, thank you.
I'm sorry if anybody likes liverwurst. I don't.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. What are some of your most important themes for the November election? And we'll go ahead and start with Representative Titone again for this one.
For the November election, I mean, I'm focusing on the people as I always have. You know, my first two elections, when I knock doors and when I have events, it's about the people. It's about you. It's not about me. It's about what I can do to make this district a better place. And that's always been my goal from the very beginning. And when I knock on a door and I want to talk to somebody when I'm canvassing, I'm not telling them about me and what I want to do. What I want to do is guided by the conversations that I have and the ideas that are presented to me. I get a lot of ideas from people in the district and from organizations that come through. Last year, there was a bill on rental theft that came from Arvada Rentals. You know, we want to make sure that we're hearing what the issues are and then addressing those issues. It's a holistic approach of doing what needs to be done now and not having a set agenda. You know, there are ideas that I have that I'd like to see go through, and I sprinkle a few of those things in between. But for the most part, what I want to do is make sure that when I'm looking to run my bills next year or understand, you know, what it is that I want to accomplish, it's about the people, and it always has been. It's the voters that matter most, and the businesses in the district, and finding out what's important to them. So that's what I'll do again this year because it's worked for me in the past, and I think it's going to continue to work for me now, and that's what I'm going to do.
I'll just jump in because like we might be having some technical difficulties. So just to kind of go along with Representative Titone said, my agenda really has to do with whatever I hear coming from constituents. My district does change a bit this upcoming election. My number changes and I just got used to my last number, but I'm looking forward to knocking doors and connecting with my new constituents and hearing what they have to say and what ideas are coming from the people and what is really needed right now. Where I like to be is juvenile policy, and I think you'll probably hear that from me over and over because that's my background and that's what I know. However, I've had constituent bills this last session in areas that I never thought I would run bills in, and I learned a lot about those areas as I was doing those bills. So again, you know, my priorities will come down to what the priorities of the constituents are and ideas that come from them. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. So I'm last, and I'm actually not up for re-election. I think my election prospects are very different, and it's a very different lens through which I would be approaching the fall. But I will, very similar to Representative Doherty, I have some new constituents when we turn over in the fall to our new district configurations. So my district largely stayed the same, which is Arvada and Westminster, all in Jefferson County. But my border used to end at approximately Indiana. And now my new district will include the Westwoods area all the way out to Highway 93. It will still not include Candelas and or Light and Rock areas. But so my goal is to try and connect with my new constituents. They don't have to elect me or anything. I'm just going to introduce myself because I will inherit their constituency into my district. And then secondly, we started some really big work around the School Finance Act. I've been on the School Finance Interim Committee for a few years, and this year was the first year that we actually found consensus on making some changes with how we fund our schools. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing that work. We kind of did the low-hanging fruit this year. So the things that we were able to find consensus on, we move forward with, which means what's left is more difficult. Coming to consensus. So I will be working on that interim committee over the summer. I'm also continuing my service to the Joint Budget Committee. So we will be getting in June our next fiscal update and our revenue picture. So we're really interested in knowing how our economy is doing. And then we will start going on a series of trips throughout the state in order to take a look at state facilities, to look at the whole financial picture of the state, so that next year when we start our work in November on the Joint Budget Committee, we have a really good idea of where we need to take the budget and how we need to approach supplementals, which happen in the mid-year, right as when the legislature is starting up.
Thank you, Rachel. That's great. That takes us into our next question, which is what will be the majority party's major themes for the 2023 legislative session? And we'll start with Representative Doherty.
Sure, thanks. So I think that some of the things will obviously be continuing the recovery from COVID, ensuring that people are able to afford day-to-day living. Again, I think it depends on what the people of Colorado have to say, and that will be our priorities. I know I've heard a lot about wildfire mitigation, housing, all those sorts of things have been issues that have come up. So I can't predict with certainty quite yet. I think we'll get on the doors, we'll talk to people, figure out where everyone's at and what they really need, and what they really need will be our priorities going forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Senator Zenzinger.
Well, thank you. It's definitely hard to predict at this point in time because we do have an election in the fall. So I will have some new colleagues with me in the Senate and new colleagues to get to know in the House. And our agendas are largely driven by the people who are elected and what they would like to do for their districts. I will say that for my part of my agenda is every year I do a poll through my newsletter about what kind of issues you would like me to focus on, in particular if I am not up for re-election. What I've heard consistently over the years is to focus what our district would like me to focus on is education, transportation, and housing. I will say that last year I saw a little bit of a shift away from focusing on transportation, and more people were interested in having me focus on the environment. So I will kind of take the pulse of the community and figure out if those are still the areas that our community would like me to focus on. And if they are, then that's what I plan on doing when I return.
Yeah, and kind of on the same theme there, we're going to have quite a few new people coming in, definitely, especially in the House. We're going to have new leadership, and we're going to have ideas that we're going to bring back from our elections and the conversations that we have from now until January. So a lot of those conversations are going to drive how we're going to prioritize the things that we're going to do for Colorado. It's we've seen a lot of those things shift, just in the 4 years that I've been here. Education funding, transportation, housing, as Senator Zenzinger has said, were some of the priorities, and the environment was one of those big ones that did bubble up in the last couple of years. And we saw that as a big portion of what we accomplished this year. I would expect that that may be something that we also continue to do. There, and as Representative Doherty said, wildfire mitigation, there's still several things that we can do in that area to give people the tools to make their home safer. These are things that are going to help decrease the cost of living, because if we can mitigate those fire risks, we can decrease the cost of insurance and housing, because we're not rebuilding it. We can keep that supply chain at a moderate level because we're not rebuilding entire communities. So we'll have to see how it goes, and how, what those topics actually come up as. We always do that, and I know that the party does some polling. We'll find out, what that result is. We do our individual polling, and each district is very different. Each district has their own priorities, and we try to mesh those with the overall priorities of the state. So we try to align a lot of those smaller district priorities and the state priorities together, and do what we think is going to be overall best for everyone. And we rely on your input. So, make sure that, if we do knock on the door, tell us what you think. If we ask in an email, tell us what you think. We don't just ask just to hear ourselves ask. We really do want to know, because we are the ones that are down at the Capitol making these decisions, and we want to make the ones that are best for everyone. So please do take part in those discussions and conversations, and let us know what we can do to make our districts and our state a better place.
Great, thank you. We do have time for a couple quick questions here from the chat. We don't have time for all of you to answer, so I'll just pick on one of you to answer each of them. The first one comes from Katie Winter, and I know this one is one we talk about all the time. How can the business community connect with bill sponsors sooner, as in working together on legislation with lawmakers to create potential policy and not chasing behind when already introduced?
I'd love to take this one.
Okay.
So the legislative process does begin sooner than when the legislature actually kicks in. So even though our opening day is the second Wednesday in January, we actually, our first 3 bill titles are due December 1st. And which means if you start to roll it back a little bit, we need to start putting together our legislative agendas way before then. So this interim period is the perfect time to start connecting with your legislator, getting to know them, and then talking about ideas for legislation that you would like to see. And then so that we can make that as part of our agenda before we submit our bill titles. Each legislator is only guaranteed 5 bills that start with you in your original chamber. Although you can see from the bills that we've talked about today that we often carry far more than 5 bills, but those require special permission, and we can sponsor an unlimited number of bills that start in the opposite chamber. But if you want to be in the driver's seat, and if you want to partner with legislators on legislation, this would be the time to start connecting with folks and working on ideas for the next session.
Okay. And our next question comes from Ed Rothschild. The legislature passes a lot of bills. It seems they do a good job evaluating potential impact on state budget. However, there appears to be only nominal effort via lobbying to evaluate the impacts on individuals, businesses, and communities. Would one of you be interested in sponsoring a bill that requires a regulatory impact assessment on all bills or major bills? Yes, this would slow the process of passing legislation down, but would result in less conflicting legislation and unintended consequences.
I'll jump in there. We did introduce a couple different tools that we use for bills in recent years. We have our Fiscal Note, which has been around a long time, which tells us about the fiscal impact of the budget. We have a greenhouse gas note, which would tell how a bill would increase or decrease greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a demographic note that would tell us how that bill would impact a demographic group or improve or decrease their access to things. I think that's where you're going with that. I think that's an interesting concept. It's could be maybe a business impact note or something like that. We could certainly talk about that and see if that's something we can get. We would have to approve it by the legislature. We'd have to run a bill to do that. And we would probably have it limited to a certain number of bills, like these additional notes, because we would have to hire people to do that kind of analysis. So there would be a little cost to the state to do that. It's something that's it's an interesting concept, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention, and I think that's something we can definitely take a look at. I'd be happy to do that for you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we are right at 9 o'clock, so we need to close things up here. So I just want to thank you all for joining our Emerging Conversation webinar series. We hope you have a great rest of your day and look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you all.